Once upon a time, Square Enix used to be known by the names of Squaresoft and Enix, respectively. Two competitors who'd often sling shit at each other by proxy through their games. This was some straight up Biggie vs Tupac shit. In the original Final Fantasy, you can find a tomb marked "Here Lies Erdrick," referring to the legendary hero in the original two Dragon Quest titles, and the main hero of Dragon Quest III, or as the series is otherwise known in the States, Dragon Warrior. But that wasn't the only difference back then. Square was one of those companies that when you bought one of their games, you knew you were in for, at worst, a decent experience. Let's put it bluntly, if Square wasn't reinventing the wheel with incredible innovations with one game, they were probably out and about saving the world from stagnation with another. That brings us to Vagrant Story. This was a game that defined the final and most exceptional years of the PlayStation's assemblage. It was gorgeous, sounded amazing, and had inventive gameplay. The gist of, everything, is that Ashley Wright is sent by the Valendia Knights of Peace in the name of Parliament to investigate Muhlenkamp. Muhlenkamp is led by a quadriplegic Sidney Lost-Tarot, which also happens to be funded by the retired yet highly influential Member of Parliament, Duke Bardorba. And then wedging themselves into this already splintered kerfuffle is the Order of the Crimson Blades, a group led by an ambitious and righteous man named Romeo Guildenstern, who is carrying out the orders of Cardinal Batistum, who naturally rules over the priesthood of Saint Eochus. Why not? So, what are they all vying and dying for? The Dark. Well, more specifically, with the exception of Ashley. The rest are combing the dead city of Le Monde for the key so that they can control the Dark. So, what is the Dark? Well, the Dark is immortality and godlike powers that of which allow you to manipulate magic in such a fashion that could easily, oh so easily, be abused. So, in other words, it's the tits. During this period of time in the world of Ivalice, magic and monsters have become nothing more than mere myths. However, in the 2,000-year-old, once impregnable city Le Monde, which was hit by a massive earthquake some 25 years ago, is a veritable treasure trove of magic and fantastical creatures. Convenient. Well, the reason for this is due to the ancient magician Muhlenkamp, the very same that the cult ran by Sydney names themselves after. She had harvested magic into grimoires, allowing those in the city to control miraculous feats, and they even built their very infrastructure entirely around doing so. The script, the screenplay, and the pacing of the story is so damn good and really proves that voice acting isn't always entirely necessary. In fact, I'd argue that some of the games out there make a good case against voice acting. Even the support cast and minor characters are rich with personality and ripe with motivation. Hardin, Rosencrantz, Merlos, and Grissom are well fleshed out secondary players caught up in the power struggle over Le Monde. And visually, this game never fails to impress me. I'm not sure how common this is, but I'm someone who can still appreciate the visuals of low-poly games. I just never felt that they aged as poorly as I often hear others claim. That doesn't mean I've been blinkered to the fact that these games couldn't benefit from a facelift, or that there weren't but ugly games back when the PlayStation was in its prime. Baby, this shit got ugly. And this was back during a time when I actually preferred the CGI cutscenes over the in-game cutscenes. Except for,
life is suffering.
From the fluidity of their animations, to the textured helios glowing around every character, to the smallest of details carved into each model, to the... We're gonna have to talk about something before we move on. Do you believe that sexuality in video games is perfectly fine if it's handled with either respect or humor? Perhaps you're tired of people saying that there's no such thing as sexualized men because they attempt to dismiss such claims with non-arguments such as, it's all just male power fantasies. Well, look no further, my friend. Vagrant Story has all the male sex objectivity you need. Yeah, that's right. There's not just one, but two whole male characters that are hilariously stripped down to the point of pornography, and they make no attempts at hiding this. Exhibit A, Sidney Lost-Tarot. Just look at this guy. He's practically wearing nothing more than a towel with some dangerously low-riding pajama pants on. I mean, look at that waistline. He's about to show off some neck, if you know what I mean. And here we have Exhibit B, Ashley Wright. You see this? Are you looking? Here, let me help you look closer. Yes, your eyes do not deceive you. This is not low texture resolution playing a trick on your eyes. Those are Ashley's ass cheeks hanging out of his pants, accented by a thong, giving him a permanent wedgie. Wait, just think about that for a second. Look at Merlos. Now look at Merlos' arse. Just look at that cherry bomb ready to burst out of that gift-wrapping skirt. You think she's scandalous? Wrong. This man has literally cut squares out of his pants to show off the most earnest meaning of booty shorts. Yeah, no such thing as sexualized men, my ass. And his ass too, apparently. And his nearly visible cock. And you know what? I'm okay with this. I really am. I think that if you can sexualize something and then make someone laugh, then it should be applauded. But beyond bare asses and hip huggers, the designs for characters such as Samantha, Guildenstern, Hardin, and even Rosencrantz, oh yeah, I forgot about how Rosencrantz likes to show off his baby-bearing hips, are remarkably spot on with their concept art by one of my all-time favorite character designers, Akihiko Yoshida, right down to the fact that Rosencrantz has a snake bite that can actually be distinguished, or Samantha's flowing bangs. By the by, can I just say that it's refreshing to have a love interest to the main villain that doesn't act like a spoiled brat and is genuinely endearing and sympathetic. In fact, that seems to be the main theme of Vagrant Story. No matter how good or bad a character is, no matter how deceptive or depraved, the entire cast is lovable. It's refreshing to have characters that are complex, and not just painted as two-dimensional dolls that are meant to appease the lowest common denominator, that may not have the patience or understanding of characters that aren't 100% good or bad. Even right down to the weapon designs, this game just oozes personality, grit, and a sense of being somewhat grounded. Even the sound effects are deliciously unique, and that's another aspect of the game that really shines. The sound design. Anything from gripping a door handle, targeting, even casting a spell. They're all well done and stick with you for years. This game may very well have my all-time favorite kit of sound samples. Needless to say, with a soundtrack by Hitoshi Sakamoto, you're in for an album that won't ever leave your head for the rest of your life. To this day, the Final Fantasy Tactics soundtrack still loops through my head over and over. Alright, as much as I've been praising Vagrant Story from here to the high heavens, there's still one very basic, and ultimately the most important question that still remains. How does the game play, and does it hold up to today's standards? This is where I seem to find myself in two minds about the game. There's many enjoyable facets in terms of gameplay, but it's not without its hiccups. Now, while the obvious place to start is with the combat, I feel for the sake of critique, we should start with its lesser two elements that felt either rushed or not entirely thought out. First, the platforming. This was, quite simply, not all too hot. While it can prove to be fun at times, at others, it feels like nothing more than a speed bump that's wasting your time, especially if you had already gotten through these sections beforehand. Thankfully, Cloudstone platforming sections can be easily manipulated with the spell Fixate, but despite being able to swiftly access the spell, it still feels as if it doesn't amount to much more than a nuisance. Essentially, they felt tacked on, as if they were meant to be something more interesting. Secondly, the box puzzles. These are actually pretty fantastic. The problem is that their implementation wasn't well paced enough throughout your dive into Le Monde. You start off with a few blithering, dull box puzzles in the beginning, then throughout the end of the first act, and nearly all throughout the second act, you don't encounter another. Not until you take the time to poke around the Iron Maiden. Then throughout most of the third act, you won't see many or any box puzzles until you roughly reach the cathedral. Then suddenly it becomes box puzzles all day, every day. Now, I'm not complaining that they're left in there. In fact, I love them. The problem is that they don't feel fitting with the motif of the game because they weren't paced well enough throughout. This leads me to believe that they had to cut most of said content due to getting it rushed out the door before the PS2 had hit the market. And finally, the combat. This is, without a doubt, the meatiest chunk of the game. So much so to the point that of which some factors clash with others. But we'll get to those in a sec. Warning, we're about to talk about combat. A fucking lot of it. Like, a fucking lot of it. It's deep. Combat, up front, at its most basic, is based around two factors, reach and limbs. Do you remember that fucking killer sphere-style combat in Parasite Eve? This is essentially what it would have looked like had it improved properly, rather than attempting to mimic Resident Evil and Dino Crisis as Parasite Eve 2 is grievously guilty of. Engaging in combat brings up a spherical grid, with which whatever is caught inside is fair game for your reach. Now, what's caught in the sphere is divided by how many limbs exist within your weapon's capacity of slashing, poking, smashing, shooting, and casting if you're working with a spell. Say it's a bat. These are such small objects your weapon will attempt to hit them as a whole. Same with slimes, however, these are a singular target simply because they are a gigantic amorphous blob. However, if you have a skeleton or a dragon within reach, you'll be able to choose arms, legs, bodies, heads, tails, and so on. What matters in which you start attacking is that sometimes each individual spot will be weaker to a specific weapon type and element, whereas their entire being is weak against specific weapon types that have built up extinguishing power against their racial class. These are distinguished by class for creature type, affinity for element type, and type for the literal weapon type such as blunt, edged, and piercing. Each limb is shown their chain evasion rating, meaning how effective chaining your attacks on that specific limb will benefit you. Class and affinity can be affected two ways: how often you beat something with your weapon, and gems. Some blades and hilts have intrinsically high or low stats for each of these classes. For instance, a silver weapon will always have a major light affinity, thus making them the perfect tool for exterminating the undead, phantoms, or creepy as fuck bare-ass stabbing living dollies of pure evil from the depths of hell itself. Some blades favor certain hilts more than others. Always keep that in mind when crafting your weapon. Crafting all within itself is a maddeningly deep system that can all around go fuck itself for trying to master. Just experiment to your heart's content. Don't drive yourself mad with this fucking chart. Finally, you must always keep an eye out on your DP, or your durability points. You can repair your weapons at a workshop, or use the skill Temper. You also need to concern yourself with your weapon's PP, or Phantom Power. This unlocks the weapon's fullest potential in its current state, and still speeds up the process. Keep in mind that nearly every time you repair your gear at a workshop, it'll deplete your Phantom Power. So keeping Temper in your rotation to keep your weapons as fresh for as long as possible is paramount for the convenience of not having to reset your Phantom bonus. Magic, as one would expect, benefits highly from weapons and armor that grant you a great deal of intellect. And at later points in the game, carrying around a decent staff coupled with the proper gems and magical buffs can make some potentially worrisome boss fights into absolute jokes. Magic revolves mostly on setting up the right buffs on yourself and the right debuffs on your foes. You'll find yourself playing cat and mouse when it comes to Heracles and Prostasia, Tarnish, and Degenerate. The AI will often try to gimp you, as you'll try to do the same to them, and believe me, you'll need these buffs. Then we have chaining. Definitely one of the more interesting and liberally alleviating assets of your combat kit. Chaining offensive skills allows you to do straight up damage, siphon mana and health, or even silence your target, whereas defensive chains allow you to relinquish your status effects upon arrival, or half the impact of physical and elemental damage. Chain more often, the higher your risk meter will fill. The better the weapon, the faster it fills. As your risk meter increases, your hit rating suffers. If you have Ever supplies handy, you can remedy such an occasion. Then we have Break Arts. Break Arts make a risk breaker what they are. By focusing their energy, they can unleash a modified attack based on their weapon type. These consume health, but not at a concerning rate. In fact, some fights encourage you to do nothing but spam Break Arts. Rosencrantz, for instance, can only be easily slain with such a method, unless if you want to watch him evade all of your normal attacks and magic, or your first encounter with the Air Elemental. If you pop on some Earth Elemental gems and slap Soil Fusion onto your weapon, Vile Scar will wreck him just after a few turns. What makes all of this crazy depth to the combat system so great is that it turns every boss fight into a puzzle all of its own. When I was younger, I would be completely ignorant as to how this all worked. I just diligently killed bosses dealing a minuscule 1 to 7 damage out of their massive multi-hundred pool of hit points. Remember this: if you ever get stuck doing minimal damage to a foe, there's always a solution. Now for the downside. Just to get it out of the way, we'll talk about what really hampers the combat system in Vagrant Story. No quick weapon swapping. It's arduous and tedious, constantly swapping out weapons and gems through the menu system, especially when you're limited to carrying only 8 weapons. This feeling grates on you rather quickly when you're trying to figure out the best weapon and gem combination to tackle the problem in front of you. And raw forbid you left something essential in the container, because that's a pain in the ass to deal with all in itself. You have to take a mandatory save each time you rearrange what you leave in there and take out. And this game's load times are fucking long. Always. I'm going to put a lot of emphasis on this. Always make sure to purge gems from items you will no longer be carrying. And lastly, if you're swapping out buffs while in the midst of seeing what the paramount solution is to killing a boss, each time you unequip a weapon, you lose your damage-based buff and must recast it. If you were unlucky like, me, and barely saw a single MP increase throughout the entirety of the game, then you're going to quaff mana potions and chew on roots like there was no tomorrow. And if you're up against a boss with high chain evasion rating, and all you can do to restore your mana is chain MP drain, well, good fucking luck. As I just mentioned, you can't choose what stats you want to increase, nor does the game just increase them all through a leveling system. Instead, what you must depend on are slot machine style stack grabs, which led me to a bloat of health, but not much else. Thankfully, you'll often find elixirs that increase your stats. I found this to be a nice touch, since they're quite commonly found through chests and they're usually loot from a boss. The RNG, though, can get a tad silly. Sometimes when you're trying to unlock a magically sealed chest, your spell will miss, or when trying to heal yourself, and you aren't even cursed, you'll whiff that shit. Sometimes it can work in your favor for the silliest of reasons. Yes, that Minotaur just missed my ass. My bare ass. Despite not having my sword and board out. Yeah. For the last of my nitpicks, you can never fully utilize going fisticuffs. Pugilist just seems to be completely off the radar for efficiency. I mean, you can if you want, but it'll serve to little to no purpose in doing so. Also, damaging magic is far too high maintenance. Its high mana upkeep is constantly discouraging you from using it, making sure you solely reserve it for boss encounters. But this game isn't without its small, little conveniences. Well, just one, really, since this isn't the type of game to hand out much at all. Teleportation. Vagrant Story, while not a very punishing game in general, seems to feel almost disturbingly kind by handing you such a spell. It's so damn good that you could travel from any save point anywhere in the game so long as you have the mana for it, which I fucking didn't. Snowfly Forest, the Wine Cellar, the Cathedral, the Undercity. It's all within reaching distance once you slap the lich's shit. I have to give credit where credit is due. Despite the fact that Matsuno recycles many typical fantasy tropes, not that I usually have a problem with this, he not once ever threw a gigantic rat my way. Not a single ROUS in sight. Additionally, Vagrant Story gives me one feature that I desire the most out of every game I beat. A New Game Plus mode. Now, it's worth mentioning that there is a clash of ideologies between Matsuno, who is, in spirit and in name, the father of Ivalice, and Square Enix themselves, including most of Team Ivalice. This clash involves Vagrant Story ever taking place on Ivalice to begin with, so you, as a player, may find it hard to choose between whose side you might take, especially since they didn't shy away from referencing Final Fantasy Tactics within Le Monde. These could simply be a loving nod to their precious Tactics title that a programmer snuck in to be cheeky. I, for one, side with the idea that Vagrant Story takes place on Ivalice. Timeline-wise, I just dig the idea that the chronological decay of civilization, magic, and species on the planet are thanks to the events that succeeded Final Fantasy XII. But if you're a purist who sides with Matsuno on this issue, then that's understandable as well, as this is essentially his creation. Therefore, living by his views and rules on the subject matter is perfectly fine and rational. Now, if this wasn't the sole problem, rumor has it that this game was rushed out of the gate for whatever reason Square had. Evidence of this can be found in Snowfly Forest when you're fighting Grissom. This encounter pits Sydney and yourself against Grissom and his summoned Dark Crusader. What is thought is that Vagrant Story was going to have a party system, and you'd control the AI via the Gambit system a la Final Fantasy XII. You would continue to command Ashley, while the others would be given a priority list of reactions based on the circumstances of the fight. Supporting this claim is also the fact that most of the time you're only fighting a maximum of 3 mobs in any given room, and due to the PlayStation's limited hardware, it seems like the perfect arena size for such a complex task. Whether if this is true or not, I can't say, but it seems to make sense, and I would love to see a return to this series with the Gambit system fully implemented. I dare to say that more people would have enjoyed 12's combat if it had combined Vagrant Story's combat with its own Gambit system, since this rumored claim states that most of the leftover ideas were poured into 12. It all makes sense when you see the casting animations and you hear the sound effects for magic, that of which mirror Vagrant Story within Final Fantasy XII. As a small note about 12, I actually quite enjoyed the combat, but I can fully understand why someone else would not really appreciate it. So, Vagrant Story, yes or no? Well, with a game that possesses this much combat complexity on such a small scale, characters this incredible, a soundtrack this mesmerizing, and a story that still haunts me emotionally and even disturbed me from time to time, yeah. Or your first encounter with the air elemental. Oh my god. Words are hard. Well, just one, really. Since this isn't really